The janitor was pointed out by the calculus teacher as a joke in front of the class. But as the man quietly approached the board and solved the problem far better than anyone anticipated, it didn't just silence the room. It transformed the entire school's perspective of him. It was Thursday during the fourth period at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana. It was the type of day when students glanced at the clock more often than they did at the board. Mr. Braddock, the calculus teacher of the school, had a reputation for being sharp-tongued, impatient, and quick with sarcasm. He wasn't particularly liked, nor was he hated. He was merely endured. The classroom felt parched. Equations filled the whiteboard. The air was tinged with a faint smell of eraser dust and worn-out sneakers. Phones lay hidden beneath desks, with some pretending to pay attention while others stared out the window. Then, a shift occurred in the atmosphere, like a sudden gust of wind. As Mr. Braddock jotted down another derivative on the board, a faint squeak emanated from the hallway. The janitor, mopping outside the classroom, kept his usual slow, steady rhythm. Mid-sentence, Braddock glanced toward the door and cracked a half-smile. Without a moment's notice, he turned to the class and pointed towards the hallway. "Well, look who's here. Mr. Dorsey, tell me you think you can solve this one." He tapped the board with the back of his marker, as if issuing a challenge on a game show. Laughter erupted. Not a roaring laughter, but the kind that causes you to shift in your seat because you're uncertain if it's permissible. Once more, Mr. Braddock smirked. "Come on, Lamar. You always appear like you've got something on your mind." Lamar Dorsey, the 52-year-old janitor, stood in the hallway with his mop in hand. He wore his usual forest green uniform, clean but faded, with L. Dorsey stitched over the chest pocket. He didn't blink or flinch. He simply stared into the room. Gradually, he stepped inside, leaning his mop against the wall. A few students sat up straighter. Some thought he would say something witty and leave. Maybe crack a joke or just walk away. Instead, Lamar approached the front of the room. "You mind?" he asked calmly. Gesturing to the board, Braddock raised his eyebrows. "Be my guest." A few phones silently slipped out of backpacks. One girl whispered, "Is he serious?" But nobody stopped Lamar. He picked up the marker, studied the equation, and paused, not out of hesitation, but more like contemplation, like someone examining a familiar map. He squinted just slightly and then began to write. No theatrics, no flair, just purposeful strokes, line after line. The room fell into an eerie stillness. The only sounds were the marker gliding across the whiteboard and a chair creaking as someone leaned forward. Mr. Braddock crossed his arms, observing closely. His expression remained unchanged, yet his jaw tightened. Lamar quietly articulated, "See, this here's a chain rule problem. But the trick is recognizing the inner function first. Once you isolate that, it becomes much cleaner." His movements indicated he had done this before, not merely the problem, but also the teaching. His tone was not smug or showy. He explained things simply, clearly, as if he had spent more time teaching than mopping. After completing, he capped the marker and stepped back, revealing a board filled with precise, organized work. He turned to Braddock, then to the class. "That's one way to do it," he said, and for a moment, no one moved. A junior in the back whispered, "He got it right." Mr. Braddock didn't respond immediately. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing emerged. The growing silence became more substantial than any joke he could have made. Lamar nodded politely and walked back toward the door, retrieving his mop. No applause, no boasting, just quiet confidence, as if he hadn't just turned the room upside down. Yet, as Lamar reached for the chalk, nobody anticipated what would transpire next. Nobody stirred for 10 full seconds. It was as if the class had been yanked from a dream and thrust into reality, the kind of moment that doesn't belong in a high school classroom. Lamar Dorsey, Mr. Dorsey, as they'd always casually called him, was halfway out the door when someone said it aloud. Wait, he just did that in his head. It was Wes Hanley. a senior in the front row who typically didn't speak unless it involved grades. He wasn't joking. His eyes were wide as he gazed at the board again, as if the answer might change while he blinked. Finally, Braddock spoke, his tone flat, almost annoyed. Well, he got the right answer. But his voice didn't carry the usual sarcasm. Something else crept in, closer to confusion or worse, discomfort. Lamar glanced back, saying, I spent a lot of time with numbers a long time ago. Then gave a small shrug. They never left me. A few students chuckled, not at him this time, but because the tension was dissipating. Lamar didn't await a response. He exited with his mop in hand, the sound of his shoes squeaking softly down the hallway, as if nothing had occurred. Like he hadn't just solved a college-level problem in less than 3 minutes without a calculator. That's when the phones emerged. Someone filmed the entire event. Carly Benson, a junior from the 3rd row, was already editing the clip before the bell rang between periods. It became all anyone could talk about. Did you see Mr. Dorsey? Braddock's face. The man looked like someone unplugged him. Where did he learn that stuff? I thought he only cleaned floors. By lunchtime, the video had reached TikTok and then Instagram. It wasn't polished. Just a shaky angle of Lamar's hands moving across the board while a voice in the background whispered, Yo, he's solving it. The caption read, Our janitor just smoked the calculus teacher. Some laughed, others stared, but the buzz kept intensifying in the teacher's lounge. It's hard to believe he did a full derivative chain problem in his head, exclaimed Miss Lynn, the physics teacher, mid-bite into her sandwich. She had stopped chewing momentarily. He did, muttered Mr. Crane. The English teacher didn't use notes and didn't even pause, like muscle memory. Braddock sat at the corner table, pretending to grade papers, but he didn't speak. Principal Everett, however, chimed in. He's been here 6 years. No one ever mentioned he had an academic background. People shook their heads. Nobody really knew much about Lamar. He arrived early, left late, floors were always clean. Light bulbs hardly ever burned out for more than a day. The man worked in silence, but he was no longer just a man behind the mop. Outside the janitor's closet, a group of students awaited, not to complain about a spill or to ask for a broom, but to converse with him. A 12-year-old boy clutching his geometry book asked, Do you tutor? Mr. Dorsey? Lamar blinked. I haven't in a long time. You should, the boy exclaimed. That was cool. Lamar chuckled, though it didn't feel dismissive, just surprising. The following day in 3rd period, Braddock's mood differed. He didn't crack jokes or randomly call on anyone. He taught with his eyes fixed on the board and his voice more restrained than usual, though no one openly addressed it. Everyone noticed. After class, Wes approached him. Mr. Braddock, that thing with Mr. Dorsey yesterday, he used the same method you showed us last week, the chain rule. Right. Braddock nodded once. Correct, only he explained it better. However, Braddock didn't respond. But what truly stunned everyone wasn't the solution. It was what Lamar said next. Lamar Dorsey had no intention of creating a scene. He had never enjoyed being the center of attention, not since he was young. So when students began to wait by the maintenance closet to chat, or when teachers cast him long looks in the hallways, he felt unbalanced. He kept his head down, continuing his usual routine, refilling paper towels, fixing a leaky faucet in the boys' locker room, wiping cafeteria tables. But he could sense the shift, the change in how people regarded him, as if they were attempting to fit him into a new picture they hadn't known existed. It wasn't just curiosity, but confusion, respect, perhaps even regret, and it made him uneasy. That afternoon, Principal Everett asked him to step by the front office, entering while still wearing his gloves, his uniform slightly damp from cleaning beneath the cafeteria sinks. He removed his cap as a gesture of respect. Everett leaned forward in his chair, hands clasped. Lamar, can I ask you something? Do you have a background in education or engineering? Lamar hesitated, glancing down for a moment. like he was dusting off an old part of himself he hadn't visited in years. I went to Purdue, he said quietly. Mechanical engineering. Full ride. The principal leaned back. Eyebrows lifted. You're serious? I had plans. Things just got complicated. And for the first time in a long while, he recounted the story. He had grown up in Gary, Indiana, a smart kid always fascinated by how things worked: motors, pulleys, anything he could dismantle and reassemble. His mother, Estelle, raised him and his two sisters on her own. She worked overtime at a textile plant, yet still read to them every night. She believed in education as the only path out. Books first, she often said. The world will try to shut the door, but if you bring your own key, they can't stop you. Lamar earned that key valedictorian, state science fair winner, and then the scholarship to Purdue. During his freshman year, he was already tutoring classmates. Professors noted his name on the attendance sheet and paid attention. However, sophomore year, he received a call that altered everything. His mother had collapsed at work. Doctors diagnosed her with late-stage cancer. By the time Lamar reached the hospital, she could hardly stay awake. I can take care of it, she whispered. Don't come home. He disobeyed. He took one semester off, then another, picking up jobs, warehouse work, night shifts at a grocery store, anything to cover bills. Classes faded into the background. So did the dream. By the time his mother passed, everything was scattered, no home to return to, no money to finish his degree, and no guidance counselor calling to inquire why he hadn't returned. I kept telling myself I'd get back to school, Lamar confided to Everett. But one thing turned into another. Life doesn't wait for you. The principal fell silent. The story was heavy. Not dramatic, just real. The kind of life you never hear unless you ask. Back at home, Lamar kept his transcripts in a box under his bed, alongside a weathered Purdue sweatshirt, an old calculator, and a photo of him and his mom on orientation day. He never touched it, but also never threw it away. Now, all of it was being dragged back to the forefront. That evening, he settled on his back steps at his small apartment complex. The sky was dim, calming, where the only sound was the hum of distant traffic. He sipped tea from a metal thermos, staring ahead. He hadn't contemplated calculus in years, not since that last tutoring gig before dropping out, and now, here it was again, like an old friend knocking at his door. Yet one decision derailed everything he had strived so hard for. Back in college, Lamar promised himself to take a short break, realigned his family, and then finish strongly. But life didn't bend to plans, especially not those built solely on hope. After his mother passed, Lamar returned to Gary, attempting to piece things together. His sisters were still in high school, barely getting by, and bills accumulated on the counter. The landlord demanded rent, and no one from Purdue reached out to inquire about his whereabouts. He accepted any job available: stockroom loader, janitor at a strip mall, overnight security at a shipping yard, anything sufficient to keep the lights on. School drifted further into the rearview mirror. Initially, he called the university from time to time to ask about reapplying and transferring credits. They would send forms, but he never mailed them. Something always interfered. Then came the breaking point. In late November, a man named Frank Booker, who owned a flooring company in South Bend, offered Lamar steady work. "You're sharp," he said. "Don't waste your time pushing brooms. I'll train you myself." Lamar felt hopeful again, an actual chance, but the day before he was scheduled to start, his youngest sister, Alana, got into a fight at school over a petty argument that escalated. She broke someone's nose, and they threatened to expel her. Lamar had to be there. No one else would show up for her thus. He missed his first day at the flooring job. Frank filled the position with someone else. And that was it. A door that could have opened slammed shut. He ceased chasing dreams thereafter and began pursuing stability. The years blurred together, town to town, job to job. He never had a record, never found himself in trouble, just survived quietly. By the time he arrived in Elkhart, in his early 40s, he wasn't looking for a new beginning, merely a steady paycheck. The school district offered benefits, and the summers felt a bit quieter. He took the janitor position without hesitation, finding it predictable, clean work. Students left him undisturbed. Teachers smiled politely. He didn't anticipate friendship or connection. He didn't need it. He maintained his routine, cleaned up after others, and slipped away before the last bell chimed. Yet numbers never abandoned him. Occasionally, when passing a math class, he would glance at the board, catch a formula, and finish it mentally. It was like muscle memory, a part of him that remained sharp even as everything else got buried beneath routine. He'd return home and make himself a quiet dinner, grilled fish, brown rice, maybe some carrots, and flip through an old engineering book he kept tucked behind the cereal boxes, simply to check if he still had it. And he always did. But he never had a reason to showcase it until Mr. Braddock called him out that day. And now, things were shifting, not only at school but within him. He contemplated the kids waiting outside his supply closet with questions and thought about Wes Hanley, who stopped by that morning with a folded piece of paper, saying, "Mr. Dorsey, I try to solve that same problem. Can you check it for me?" And without hesitation, Lamar gently yet carefully explained where Wes had erred, never causing him to feel foolish. Wes smiled when comprehension finally dawned, not just from pride but from connection. That kind of moment seemed to linger with you. But not everyone was elated. Braddock, for one, had grown quieter, too quiet. Students noticed. Teachers recognized the shift. There was something unsettling about being outshined in front of your class by a man you'd never considered, an event that rattled him. He didn't lash out, but his tone turned shorter, his patience thinner. When others mentioned Lamar in the lounge, he changed the subject. He wasn't accustomed to being eclipsed, especially not by someone who had been invisible to him until now. Life, however, had one more twist in store. The video spanned beyond Eisenberg High. It began small, a local student page reposting it with the caption, "When your janitor turns out to be smarter than your teacher." Soon, it made its way onto a regional education forum, and within the weekend, crossed state lines. Online, people expressed disbelief. They weren't mocking Lamar, they were awestruck. "The man broke it down cleaner than my college professor. Someone get this man a classroom and a chalkboard, not a mop." Evidence proved you never know someone's story. By Monday morning, Lamar remained unaware of any of this. He didn't follow social media. He still possessed a flip phone. When arriving at work, his first task was fixing a jammed paper towel dispenser in the girls' bathroom. Just like every other Monday. Yet, today felt distinctive. Teachers paused their discussions as he walked by. Students nodded, not with obligation, but a peculiar kind of respect. A few even smiled, as though they were truly seeing him for the first time. "Hey, Mr. Dorsey." One girl called as he passed the library. "You're kind of famous now." Lamar chuckled softly. Don't believe everything you read. However, upon turning the corner, Wes Hanley awaited him with two other students. One held a calculus book, open to a highlighted problem in pink. "Would you mind going through this with us?" Wes inquired, confused. Lamar looked around, then replied, "You got a free period?" "We made time," they said. So, just like that, in a hallway lined with lockers and science fair posters, Lamar sat down on the floor with three teenagers and guided them through a multivariable equation, step by step, line by line. It wasn't loud or flashy, but something meaningful transpired. Down the hall, someone filmed it. Nobody informed Lamar. He wouldn't have appreciated that. Back in the office, Principal Everett conversed with someone from the local school board. "Yes, that's correct. Lamar Dorsey's been with us for 6 years. No, he's not faculty. He's a custodian." He paused, listening. "Well, I wouldn't call it unorthodox. I'd say it's overlooked." Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, Braddock was reading an email forwarded by a parent, a link to the now viral video. No commentary. No subject line. Just the link accompanied by the phrase, "Thought you'd want to see this." He closed the laptop without watching it. That afternoon, Everett called Lamar back in, offered him a seat. Lamar opted to stay standing. "I've received a request from the board," the principal explained. "They want to know if you'd be interested in leading an after-school tutoring program. Small group. Voluntary. Just a trial run." Lamar didn't respond right away. "You be compensated." "Of course." Everett added, "It's not about replacing your current role. It's just about adding to it, sharing what you clearly still possess." Lamar examined his hands, calloused. "Clean. Worn. I haven't taught in a long time." He stated, "You haven't stopped knowing." Everett replied. Lamar raised his gaze. There was no pressure in the principal's voice, only a simple invitation. "I'll think about it." That night, he retrieved the old cardboard box from underneath his bed, the one containing the Purdue sweatshirt, transcripts, and orientation photo. He hadn't touched it in years. He laid everything out on the table. The paper had yellowed slightly, the edges curled, but the words remained intact. That was the thing about knowledge, it didn't fade. It merely waited. He didn't need to go viral, nor did he care about the views or comments. But knowing he could still make a difference tugged at something deep within. While some were amazed, others weren't thrilled by his rising fame. The more attention Lamar received, the more the school began to change. It started with the kids, the first to transform. Those who had previously passed him in the hall without a second glance were now stopping by to greet him, and a few even asked for homework assistance between classes. By the conclusion of the second week, a small group of students unofficially formed what they referred to as Dorsey sessions. They met in the library after school, notebooks open, heads bowed, listening as Lamar elucidated concepts with clarity that no one expected. Yet everyone respected. Then came the teachers. Most were supportive. Miss Lynn from physics was the first to swing by the library to observe him working with the students. "You've got a gift," she softly asserted. "And I don't mean just with numbers." Yet not everyone felt thrilled. Mr. Braddock hadn't said a word about Lamar since that day. In the teacher's lounge, he behaved as if nothing had changed. Yet the bitterness was palpable in his silences. He spoke in clipped sentences, never meeting Lamar's gaze, and never mentioning calculus. When a parent-teacher meeting raised questions about Lamar's growing influence with the students, Braddock said, "It's good they're interested in math. Let's ensure we don't blur the lines between instruction and inspiration." It sounded courteous on the surface, but the tone was clear. Everyone heard it. The principal wouldn't let it slide. He called Braddock into his office one morning and laid it out plainly. "I know it stung, but Lamar didn't embarrass you, he inspired them." Braddock shifted in his seat. "He's not qualified. He's educated more than we realized." Everett countered. "And more importantly, he's reaching kids in a way none of us have." Braddock opened his mouth, yet ultimately shut it. There was nothing to say, not really. Meanwhile, Lamar maintained his routine. He didn't request a title and didn't seek special treatment. But when the principal extended a modest stipend to continue the tutoring sessions, he accepted, not for the money, but because it felt appropriate. He began carrying a small binder with him, filled with pages of problems, blank worksheets, and notes he had handwritten. During breaks, he'd sit at the back corner of the cafeteria, scribbling formulas from memory, occasionally nodding at a student who called out, "Hey, Mr. D." One afternoon, Carly, the student who filmed the initial clip, stopped him near the vending machines. "Did you ever want to be a teacher?" she asked. Lamar paused before responding. "I wanted to build things, teach later." "Maybe, but life had different ideas." "Well," she said, handing him a fresh mechanical pencil, "I think you're doing both now." He smiled. "Thank you." But amid all the positivity, tension brewed. More parents initiated calls to the school. Most were supportive. Yet one anonymous complaint reached the board. Is it appropriate for a janitor to tutor students in a school setting? Is he certified? Has he been background checked for instruction? Everett handled it quickly. He's an employee of the district. He's done nothing wrong. If concern was genuinely the motive, they could have spoken with me directly. He never disclosed the complaint to Lamar. Still, Lamar sensed something in the air, not resentment, but resistance, as if some individuals didn't know how to position him now that he no longer fit snugly into the background. Then, one afternoon, Braddock did something unexpected. He walked into the library during one of Lamar's tutoring sessions, quietly observing from a distance as Lamar elucidated integrals to a group of 4 students. After about 10 minutes, he stepped forward. "You mind if I sit?" Braddock asked. Lamar looked up, his expression unchanged. He nodded toward the chair. "As long as you don't mind learning something." The students chuckled, just enough to lighten the moment. For once, Braddock's smirk wasn't mean. They sat together that day, said little. Yet it marked a beginning. But Lamar wasn't interested in titles. He had something deeper in mind. It was no longer about proving anything for Lamar Dorsey. Standing at the whiteboard, students gathered around. This endeavor was never about redemption or revenge. He sought neither impressiveness nor memorability. He merely aimed to show up for them, the kids. Those reminding him of the boy he once was, every Tuesday and Thursday. Right after the final bell, that corner of the library filled with chatter, questions, scribbled notes, and wide eyes as Lamar guided students through math problems they once dreaded, not because he owned all the answers, but because he instilled in them the belief that they could uncover those answers themselves. That was what stayed with them. There was Isaiah, the freshman who nearly failed algebra last semester, now solving quadratic equations without a hint of panic, and Tasha, who had once despised math, now leading mini sessions on weekends for her cousins with notes from Lamar. He never positioned himself at the front like a traditional teacher. Instead, he sat beside his students, conversing with them, asking them questions before addressing theirs. Gradually, more teachers began dropping by, not to supervise, but to learn how he achieved his results. Miss Lynn inquired if she could adopt some of his explanations for her class. Coach Rivera asked if Lamar would help establish a summer prep group for incoming freshmen. Even Braddock, hesitant, prideful Braddock, stopped by regularly. Not every day, but often enough to quietly offer an extra problem or two, gradually extending words of encouragement to the students. The sharpness in his tone dulled. Something inside him softened. One day during a tutoring session, Braddock lingered after the students departed. "You know," he said, gazing at the board, "I used to think this job gave me importance. Teaching made me powerful." Lamar didn't interrupt, but Braddock continued. "You've reminded me about what it really involves, showing up, making it count." Lamar simply nodded. "We all lose our way sometimes." He held no grudges. There was no need to. Principal Everett summoned him again a month later, presenting a proposal to formalize his sessions into an elective class for the following semester, not for credit, but for enrichment, a bridge connecting students and their confidence. "We'll have to clear some hurdles," Everett cautioned, "but if you're interested." Lamar gently shook his head. "I appreciate it," he replied, "but I don't need the title. I'd rather keep it simple. Let the kids come because they want to, not because it's on a schedule." Everett nodded. "Then we'll support you however we can." Word spread beyond the school district. A local reporter contacted him for an interview. Lamar kept his responses brief, no dramatic tales or self-promotion. "I'm merely showing them what they already have within," he stated. "Sometimes it takes a little time to see it." In the spring, Eisenberg High hosted its annual student showcase featuring science projects, art displays, choir performances, and in one corner of the gym, a booth named Dorsey's Table showcased student-written reflections on math, life, and confidence. Dozens of students expressed how Lamar helped them discover more in themselves, not by providing them answers, but by genuinely listening and believing in them. By the event's end, people no longer asked, "Is he the janitor?" Instead, they stated, "That's Mr. Dorsey." He didn't don a suit. He didn't deliver a speech. He stood beside the table, smiled, and thanked the students who approached. Later that evening, back at his apartment, he retrieved the old Purdue sweatshirt from the box beneath his bed. He didn't wear it. Instead, he folded it neatly, placed it in a new storage bin, and added a folder brimming with student thank you notes beside it. Legacy, he understood, isn't defined by titles. It rests in what you leave behind in others. He didn't require finishing school to teach. No degree was necessary to lead. He merely had to show up every day and care. And that's precisely what he intended to continue doing. Thank you for listening to Lamar's story. If it resonated with you, if it reminded you of someone you've overlooked or someone who believed in you, subscribe and share it with someone in need, because sometimes the biggest minds are concealed within the quietest places.